The mist in the Colorado high country was a lonely thing, and Magnus Thorne liked it that way. He stood 8 feet tall, a giant made of pine wood and mountain stone, and when he moved, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. His cabin was a fortress, perched on a ledge 3 long miles above the little town of Pine Ridge, close enough to trade for what he needed, but far enough that nobody came calling without a damn good reason. And nobody ever had a good reason. He'd built the place with his own 2 hands, felling the trees, setting the stones. A man learns to be precise when his life depends on it. But inside there was a secret. The rough-hewn walls held an artist's touch. Above the fireplace, his rifle wasn't just a tool, it was a masterpiece. Carved into the walnut stock was a mountain scene so real, you could almost feel the cold wind whipping off the peaks. Nobody in Pine Ridge knew about the carvings. They only knew the giant. They saw the man who came to town twice a season, silent and grim. They saw his pale blue eyes, cold as a winter sky, scanning every room for a threat. The children would scatter when his shadow fell over the trading post door. The women would whisper prayers and hurry away. The men would suddenly remember they had somewhere else to be. Magnus told himself he liked their fear. Fear was a wall, and it kept them from seeing the truth. It kept them from seeing the loneliness that ate at him day and night. It kept them from seeing the way his massive, scarred hands could create something beautiful when he thought no one was watching. But on this September morning, something was different. The trading post was buzzing. A wagon train had pulled in the night before, full of families pushing west before the snows locked the passes for good. Magnus just needed coffee and ammunition, a simple trade. But he hesitated outside. The noise of all those people packed into that little store, it set his teeth on edge. He finally ducked through the door, his frame blocking out the sun. The chatter died. "That's him," a voice whispered. "The giant." He ignored it. He walked to the counter, and Jeremiah Walsh, the portly man who ran the post, started gathering his things. Walsh's hands were shaking. Magnus couldn't tell if it was from fear or just the excitement of a cash sale. "Fine morning, Magnus," Walsh said, his voice a little squeaky. Magnus just grunted and laid the silver coins on the counter. The exact amount. No talk, no haggling. In and out. That was the rule. "Shame about the Hutchins family," Walsh pushed on, desperate to fill the silence. "Lost their youngest to the fever. Decided to join up with the Morrison train. Sometimes a new start is the only cure for grief." Magnus froze. His hand hovered over the bag of coffee beans. He knew grief. He knew how it could hollow a man out from the inside, leaving nothing but an empty shell. He didn't say a word, but something in his face must have softened, because Walsh got bolder. "There's a woman with him," the merchant said, leaning closer. "Came all the way from Missouri on her own. Esther Mae Fletcher, a seamstress. Lost her whole family to the cholera last spring. Parents, brother, the man she was supposed to marry. Can you imagine? Heading west all alone." Magnus grabbed his supplies, but his eyes drifted to the window. He could see the wagon camp, the smoke from their cook fires rising into the crisp morning air. "They say her needlework is the finest you'll ever see," Walsh rambled on. "Mrs. Morrison swears by it. Course she ain't much to look at. A big woman, you know. Round as a barrel, they say, but with a sweet disposition." A laugh burst out of Magnus's chest. It was a hard, ugly sound, like rocks grinding together. It shocked everyone in the store, and it even shocked him. "A sweet disposition," he repeated, his voice raw. "Like that matters out here." He shook his head, the bitter laugh still caught in his throat. "A soft woman won't last a week in this country. This land eats the weak and asks for more." Walsh's face turned red. "Now see here, Magnus. There's no call for—" But Magnus was already gone. He pushed through the silent crowd, the whispers following him like ghosts. He was almost at the door when a figure stepped right into his path. She was just as Walsh had described, round and solid, with dark auburn hair peeking out from a plain bonnet. She wore a simple dress of blue wool, but it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They were brown and steady, and they met his without a flicker of fear. He towered over her, a mountain over a wildflower, but she didn't flinch. He saw her hands. They were small but calloused from hard work. "Excuse me," she said, her voice perfectly calm. I believe you dropped this. She held out a silver coin. The entire store had gone dead silent. Everyone was watching. The mountain man and the stranger. I didn't drop anything, he said, his voice a low growl. Perhaps not, she replied, her face serene. But someone did, and you were the last to leave. I thought you should check. He patted his pockets. His money was all there. He looked back at her, at this Esther Mae Fletcher, and saw something in her gaze that shook him. It wasn't fear. It wasn't pity. It was just assessment, like she was looking right through the monster and seeing the man inside. Keep it, he grunted and pushed past her into the street. But he couldn't just walk away. He stopped and glanced back through the grimy window. He saw her turn the coin over to Walsh. Then she began examining a bolt of fabric, her fingers tracing the weave with a reverence he understood. It was the same way he felt when he held a piece of good, solid wood. She looked up. Her eyes met his through the glass. And for a second, just a single second, something passed between them. A spark of recognition. Two lonely people in a world that didn't understand them. Then Magnus turned and walked away, heading for the trail that led back to his cold, empty cabin. He was disturbed, rattled in a way he hadn't been in years. That night, the lamp threw dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Magnus held his knife, but he wasn't just carving. He was thinking of steady brown eyes and small, capable hands. The rifle stock in his lap seemed to come alive. Without thinking, his knife began to move, adding a new detail to the mountain scene he'd spent months on. A single, small wildflower, growing out of a crack in a granite rock, delicate but refusing to be broken by the harsh landscape. He put the knife down before it was finished. He was troubled by what he'd done. This was foolish. He had trap lines to check, meat to smoke, a life to survive. He had no time for fantasies about a woman with auburn hair who wasn't afraid of him. But when he finally slept, his dreams were filled with the sound of a gentle voice and the rustle of a blue wool skirt. He dreamt of hands that could make beauty out of simple thread, just like his could make art out of rough wood. He woke before dawn, and for the first time in 15 years, his cabin didn't feel peaceful. It felt empty. He knew the wagon train would be gone in a day or two. Esther Mae Fletcher would be gone, heading west to a new life. He told himself he was glad. Complications were the last thing he needed. But as he stepped out into the biting morning air, his gaze drifted down toward the valley. He found himself wondering, did the seamstress from Missouri ever look up at the mountains? And did she ever think of the giant who lived there all alone? The blizzard didn't just arrive, it attacked. It came 3 days later, a monster of wind and snow that clawed its way down from the peaks. Magnus had lived in these mountains for 15 years, and he'd never seen anything like it. He'd felt it coming in the ache of his old bones, but he wasn't prepared for this. The wind screamed through the pines, bending ancient trees like they were twigs. Snow came down in blinding white sheets, burying the world he knew. Magnus battened down his cabin, stoked the fire, and settled in to wait. He had wood, he had food. He was safe. Then he heard the horse screaming. It was a sound of pure terror, a sound that cut through the howl of the storm like a razor. Magnus pulled on his heaviest coat and plunged into the chaos. The snow was already past his knees, each step a brutal battle. He found them a quarter-mile from his cabin, a bay mare thrashing in a snowdrift, its leg bent at a sickening, unnatural angle, and lying beside her, a still figure in a dress of blue wool. His heart stopped. He knew who it was before he even brushed the snow from her face. Esther Mae Fletcher. She was unconscious, her lips blue, her breathing so shallow it was barely there. The wagon train was long gone. They had left her behind. The mare's leg was shattered. There was nothing to be done. He ended its suffering with a single, swift act of mercy. Then he lifted Esther into his arms. She was so light, fragile as a bird, and colder than the snow she was lying in. His cabin, his fortress, suddenly felt impossibly small as he laid her on his narrow bunk. He worked fast. Hesitation was death in the mountains. He stripped off her wet clothes with a detached efficiency, wrapping her in his warmest furs. For 2 days he fought for her life. He kept the fire roaring, turning the small cabin into a furnace. He forced warm broth between her lips whenever she surfaced from the fever. He held her when the chills shook her so violently he thought the bed frame would break. In her delirium, she spoke of a life he couldn't imagine. A life of quilting circles and church socials of people named Sarah and Thomas. A life a million miles away from his own. On the third morning, she opened her eyes. They were clear, and she looked right at him. "You saved my life," she said. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, but it was steady. He busied himself with the coffee pot, unable to meet her gaze. "Horse broke its leg. Had to be put down." "Poor creature," she murmured. She struggled to sit up, then realized she was wearing one of his shirts. A faint blush crept up her cheeks, but she didn't scream or cry. She just looked at him. "I suppose I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything," he said, keeping his back to her. "Storm caught you. Happens." "I missed the wagon train," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "My mare threw a shoe. I couldn't keep pace. Mr. Morrison said they couldn't wait. He was right, of course." Magnus turned around, the coffee pot in his hand. "Morrison left you? Alone?" The tone of his voice made her eyes go wide. A cold, familiar rage was building in his chest, the same fury that had made him a legend to be feared. "He gave me supplies," she said quickly, "and directions to Pine Ridge. It wasn't his fault. I was the one who fell behind." "Like hell it wasn't," Magnus snarled, slamming the pot down on the hearth. "You don't abandon people. Not out here." The force in his own voice surprised him. He'd been alone so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to want to protect someone. He turned back to the fire, disturbed by the fire raging inside him. After a long silence, Esther spoke. "Well," she said softly, "I'm grateful you found me." The storm howled on for days. An uneasy truce settled over the little cabin. Esther was a quiet presence. She mended his torn shirts with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She took his plain rations of salt pork and beans and somehow turned them into actual meals. And she wasn't afraid of him. She moved carefully around him, always respectful of his space, but there was no terror in her eyes. She spoke to him like he was just a man. She asked about the cabin, about the mountains, about the storm. "You built this yourself," she said one evening, running a hand over the smooth-hewn logs. "Had to," he grunted. "It's beautiful work," she continued, tracing a perfect joint with her finger. "You have a gift with wood." He just shrugged. "A man learns what he needs to survive." But later that night, as the fire danced, he found himself telling her. He told her about the tools he'd made, the secrets of the wood, the deep satisfaction of building something that would last. She listened, her brown eyes full of genuine interest. "I suppose it's not so different from sewing," she said when he was done. "Taking something raw and shaping it into something useful. Something beautiful." "Never thought of it that way," he admitted. "My grandmother taught me to see the dress in the fabric before I ever made a cut," she said. "She said the material tells you what it wants to be, if you just listen." He knew exactly what she meant. He felt a strange connection to this woman, a shared understanding that he'd never felt with anyone before. But it made him nervous. Her presence was filling empty spaces inside him he hadn't even known were there. The cabin felt like a home for the first time. But intimacy was a trap. It led to expectations. It led to people wanting more than he could give. It led to pain. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. On the sixth morning, the storm broke. The silence was deafening. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting the snow-covered world in brilliant white. "Weather's clear," he announced. "Trail will be passable in a day or two." Esther looked up from darning a sock. Her expression was impossible to read. "Of course. You'll be wanting your space back." "It's not what I want," he lied. The words came easy after a lifetime of practice. "There aren't enough supplies for two to winter here." "No, of course not," she said, folding the sock with careful precision. "I wouldn't want to impose." He told himself he was relieved. This strange domestic week was over. Soon his life would go back to normal, back to the silence, back to the solitude. But as he started to clear the snow from the door, he found his eyes lingering on her sewing thimble, glinting in the firelight, on the careful way she had organized his few books. These little touches had turned his shelter into something more. In 2 days, she would be gone. All of it would be gone. The cabin would be his again, silent and empty. He told himself that was what he wanted. To care about someone, to let them matter, was a risk he couldn't afford to take. But as he shoveled the heavy snow, he found himself moving slower than usual. He was delaying the inevitable. He was trying to hold on to this feeling, this warmth, for just a little while longer, before it vanished forever. The snow was a prison. For another week, the trail down to Pine Ridge was impassable. Every morning, Magnus would go out, check the path, and come back to the cabin. He'd tell her the snow was still too deep, his face a careful, neutral mask. He was torn. Part of him was relieved to have her here, to have this strange, warm life. But another part, a darker part, was uneasy. Esther accepted the delays without complaint, but sometimes he would catch her watching him. She had a look on her face like she was trying to solve a puzzle, like she was seeing pieces of him that he kept hidden from the world. "You don't have to sleep on the floor," she said one night. He was spreading his bedroll by the fire, just as he had every night since she'd arrived. He froze. "The bunk is yours." "It's your bed," she said, her voice practical, calm. "In your cabin. We're adults, Magnus, and there's precious little warmth in this world. A practical arrangement is just that. Practical." The offer hung in the air between them. He thought about the nights lying on the hard floor, listening to the soft sound of her breathing. He thought about the way the moonlight touched her hair. It was too close, too dangerous. "The floor's fine," he said, his voice rough. But that night the temperature dropped. The wind found its way through tiny cracks in the walls. A bitter, biting cold. Magnus woke up to the sound of her teeth chattering. She was shivering violently, huddled under a mountain of furs. He didn't let himself think. He just acted. He gathered his own blankets and walked to the bed. "Move over." Her eyes flew open, wide and questioning in the firelight. "You're freezing," he said. "This is about survival, nothing more." She shifted and he settled beside her, trying not to touch her. He lay stiff as a board, staring up at the dark ceiling, feeling the warmth of her body slowly seep through the layers between them. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "I know this isn't easy for you." And just like that, the tension in his chest eased. She understood. She wasn't asking for more than he could give. Slowly the shivering stopped. Her breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep. He stayed awake for a long time, disturbed by how right it felt to have her there, curled up beside him, how natural it felt to not be alone. When he woke in the morning, she was still asleep, her head resting on his shoulder. Her hand was on his chest. In her sleep, she looked younger. The careful composure she always wore washed away. He didn't want to move. He didn't want to break the spell. Then she stirred, her brown eyes fluttering open. He saw the awareness dawn on her face, followed by a soft pink blush. "Good morning," she whispered, not moving away. "Morning," he rasped. "Storm's past. Trail should be clearer today." They moved apart, a polite distance between them, pretending the night hadn't happened. But it had. A wall had come down between them, and neither of them knew what to do next. He started noticing little things about her. The way she tilted her head when she was sewing, a small white scar on her hand. The graceful way she moved around the cabin, never disturbing a thing. She had made herself small, unobtrusive, as if she was used to not being wanted. And that realization sparked something fierce and protective inside him. That night, as she cooked, he found himself watching her. "Where did you learn to cook like that?" he asked, surprising himself. She glanced up. "My mother. She said a woman who couldn't make a meal from scraps wouldn't last long as a wife." Her face grew sad. "It didn't matter in the end." "You're intended," Magnus said softly. "The one who died." "James," she said. There was old grief in her voice, but not fresh pain. "We grew up together. It was just assumed we would marry. But you didn't love him." The words were out before he could stop them. Too blunt, too personal. She paused, stirring the pot. "I cared for him. He was a good man, kind, steady. But no," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't love him. Not in the way the poets write about. He found himself wondering what kind of love she did dream about, and the thought bothered him more than it should have. "Why come west?" he asked, changing the subject. "After everything you lost." "There was nothing left for me in Missouri," she said, her voice flat. "After James died, his family, they didn't want me around. They said I brought bad luck." The work dried up. The whispers started. She took a deep breath. "I heard they needed seamstresses in Oregon, a place where nobody knew my name, a place to start over." She had lost everything, her family, her home, her future, and she hadn't broken. She had packed her bags and set out to build a new life, all by herself. He wasn't sure he could have done the same. Later after they ate, she sat by the fire, mending one of his shirts. He went to a dark corner of the cabin and pried up a loose floorboard. He pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a simple gold ring, his mother's wedding ring. The day before she died, she had pressed it into his hand. "This ring has seen real love, Magnus," she'd whispered, her eyes bright with fever. "The hard kind. The kind that grows in the dark. Don't let your father's poison make you think you're not worthy of it. Promise me you'll find it." He had promised, but he had never believed it. A man like him? Too big, too rough, too full of a darkness he fought to control every single day. How could a woman ever love a man like him? But as he sat there in the quiet cabin, with Esther's gentle presence filling the silence, he started to wonder. He put the box away. Tomorrow the trail would be clear. He would take her back to Pine Ridge. She would find her way west. She would find a good man, a normal man, and build the life she deserved. He told himself it was for the best. But as he rolled out his blankets by the fire, a cold dread filled him. He was about to lose something precious, something he hadn't even known he was looking for. The morning was clear and cold, a perfect day for traveling. Magnus woke to see Esther already packing her few belongings. Her movements were neat, precise, the movements of a woman used to leaving things behind. "Trail should be clear," he said. The words felt like stones in his mouth. "Yes," she said, her face unreadable. "I can't thank you enough, Magnus, for everything. You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," he mumbled. She stopped packing and looked at him. "No," she said softly, "not anyone." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. He turned away, busying himself with his rifle, with supplies, with anything to avoid her gaze. He kept stealing glances at her. He watched her carefully wrap a worn, leather-bound book. "My grandmother's recipes," she said, noticing him looking. "She taught me that a good meal could do more than just feed a person. It could show them they were cared for." He thought of the meals they had shared. She had been showing him care, and he had been too afraid to see it. "You'll make some family very happy out west," he said, his voice strained. A shadow crossed her face. "Perhaps," she said, "but I've learned not to count on happiness. It seems to find you when you least expect it." The journey down the mountain was long and silent. He broke the trail through the deep snow, and she followed in his footsteps without a single complaint. As they got closer to Pine Ridge, the sounds of the town drifted up to them. An axe splitting wood, children laughing. Each sound was a reminder that this was her world, not his. He was an outsider. He would always be an outsider. The town stared as they walked down the main street, the giant and the woman he had saved. He ignored them, leading her to the boarding house. The proprietor, a fussy woman named Mrs. Campbell, rushed out. "My dear child, we thought you were lost in the storm. Mr. Morrison said you were missing." "I was fortunate," Esther said, her eyes finding his. "I found shelter." Mrs. Campbell's eyes widened as she finally took in Magnus. "Oh my, yes, I can see that you did." He shifted, uncomfortable under her stare. This was why he stayed away. The questions, the looks, the way they treated him like a caged animal. "I have to go," he said to Esther. "Trap lines to check." "Of course," she said. He thought he saw a flash of regret in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Thank you again." He nodded and turned to leave. "Magnus." He stopped. She was walking toward him, holding a small cloth bundle. "Some bread," she said, "for your journey back. I know you have supplies, but—" Her voice trailed off. He took the bundle. It was still warm. She had made it for him. Their fingers brushed and a jolt went through him. For a moment, they just stood there, the noise of the town fading away. He memorized her face, the copper glint in her hair, the steady warmth in her brown eyes. Then Mrs. Campbell cleared her throat, and the moment was broken. He turned and walked away. He didn't look back, but he could feel her eyes on him all the way down the street. The climb back to his cabin felt longer than ever before. The silence inside was deafening. It felt hollow, empty. Her scent was still in the air. Her books were still arranged neatly on his shelf. Traces of her were everywhere. That night he picked up his rifle stock and his carving knife. The wildflower he had started seemed to call to him. His hands moved on their own, finishing the delicate bloom. A mountain columbine growing from a crack in solid rock. A symbol of beauty in a harsh world. A symbol of her. 3 days later, he was back in Pine Ridge. He told himself he needed more coffee. It was a lie. He learned from Walsh that Esther had found work with the Henderson family. Their wife was overwhelmed with newborn twins, and Esther had stepped in to help. "She's a godsend," Walsh said. "That house is running smooth as silk now." Magnus felt a sharp pang of something he didn't want to name. The Hendersons could give her a home, a community, a life, everything he couldn't. As he was leaving, he saw her. She was across the street carrying a basket of laundry. She wore a green dress that brought out the color in her eyes. Her hair was tucked under a crisp white cap. She looked like she belonged. He watched her disappear into the Henderson house, and the feeling of loss was so sharp it almost brought him to his knees. That night, back in his empty cabin, he stared at the wildflower on his rifle. It mocked him. For 1 week, his life had been different. It had been full of warmth, of companionship, of a hope he hadn't known was possible. Now that hope was 3 miles down the mountain, close enough to haunt him, but too far to reach. This was for the best, he told himself. She deserved more than a life with him. But as the winter nights grew longer and colder, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He couldn't stop wondering if his mother had been right. Maybe love really could grow in the dark, and maybe he was the biggest fool in all of Colorado for letting it walk away. Winter clamped down on the mountains like a steel trap. By December, the snowdrifts were piled up to the cabin's eaves, and the silence was so deep it felt like a living thing. Magnus had always craved the solitude, but now it felt like a punishment. The memory of Esther's soft humming echoed in the quiet corners of his home. He worked from dawn until dusk, trying to exhaust himself, trying to outrun his own thoughts. But every night he would sit by the fire and find himself staring at the carved wildflower on his rifle, remembering. One morning he woke to a strange feeling. He looked out the window and saw them, horse tracks, leading toward his cabin, then away again. Someone had been here in the night, watching. He followed the tracks until they vanished into the trees. It wasn't a lost traveler. The path was too deliberate. 3 days later, it happened again. This time he caught a glimpse of a rider, a dark shape against the snow, watching his cabin from a distance. When Magnus stepped outside with his rifle, the figure was gone. The visits continued, always at dawn or at dusk, always just out of reach. An old cold instinct for danger began to stir inside him. He started sleeping with his father's hunting knife by his bed. He hated that knife. It was the only thing he had left of a brutal, violent man who had taught him that love was a weakness. The scars his father left on him, inside and out, were the reason he'd fled to these mountains in the first place. He had sworn he would never become that man. But the watcher in the woods was waking up the darkness inside him. In January, he made the trip to Pine Ridge. The town was huddled under a thick blanket of snow. When he walked into the trading post, Walsh didn't look scared. He looked desperate. "Magnus, thank God," the merchant whispered, his hands twisting in his apron. "We've got trouble. The kind of trouble only you can handle." Magnus waited. Every nerve in his body was screaming. "Ute war party," Walsh said, his voice dropping. "Spotted 2 days ago. Near the Henderson place? 6 of them. Morrison thinks they're scouting for a raid." The Henderson place. The words hit Magnus like a physical blow. Esther. She was there, tending to children, thinking she was safe. "How many?" Magnus asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Morrison saw 6. Could be more. We sent for the cavalry, but they're weeks away. We're sitting ducks, Magnus. He took the information in with cold, hard calculation. 6 warriors could burn Pine Ridge to the ground. What's the plan? Bring everyone into town. Fortify the church, Walsh said, not sounding very confident. But the Hendersons, stubborn fools. Tom Henderson says he won't abandon his home, says he'll defend it himself. The rage that surged through Magnus was blinding. Esther, trapped out there, with only a stubborn farmer to protect her. Henderson's a fool, Magnus said. A determined one, Walsh replied. Maybe you could talk some sense into him. He might listen to a man like you. The Henderson homestead was nestled in a valley, prosperous and peaceful, and completely vulnerable. As Magnus approached, Tom Henderson came out to meet him, a shotgun cradled in his arms. Behind him, in the doorway, Magnus saw a flash of green wool. Esther, his heart hammered against his ribs. Thorne, Henderson said, didn't expect to see you. Heard you have a Ute problem, Magnus replied. Came to help. Henderson looked surprised. The mountain man never got involved. Just then, Esther stepped out of the house. Her face was pale with worry, but when she saw him, a light came into her eyes. Relief. Magnus, she said, her voice soft. It's good to see you. Those simple words made his chest ache. Miss Fletcher, he said with a nod. Henderson looked between them, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. You two know each other? We've met, Magnus said. Well, Henderson said, lowering his shotgun, since you're here, maybe you'll stay for dinner. Your presence might calm the wife's nerves. He wanted to say no, but he needed to see for himself. He needed to make sure she was safe. The Henderson house was warm and chaotic, full of the sounds of a family. Esther moved through it all with a quiet grace, helping with the meal, tending to the twin boys who stared at Magnus with wide, curious eyes. But he saw the tension in her shoulders. He saw the way she kept glancing out the windows, towards the dark woods. Over dinner, Henderson boasted about his defenses. Magnus listened in silence. The man was brave, but he was a fool. His preparations were a joke. If the Utes attacked, these people would be slaughtered. Later, when they were alone in the kitchen, Magnus finally spoke. You shouldn't be here, he said. She didn't stop washing the dishes. Where else would I be? These people have been kind to me. I won't abandon them. There's a safe haven in town, he pushed. You'd be protected. She turned to face him, her brown eyes blazing. The Utes won't care about my loyalty. Is that what you're saying? That's exactly what I'm saying. Then I suppose I'll just have to trust in God, she said, her gaze locking with his. And in good friends. The trust in her eyes was a physical weight. She was counting on him. She believed in him. He had spent 15 years running from this kind of responsibility. But looking at her, so brave, so stubborn, so impossibly precious, he knew he had no choice. I'll stay, he said, until the danger passes. The relief on her face was all the thanks he needed. They both knew he wasn't staying for the Hendersons. He was staying for her. That night, Magnus sat watch in the barn, his rifle across his lap, his father's knife heavy on his hip. He had hidden from the violence in his blood for so long, but as he watched over the sleeping house, he finally understood. Some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth fighting for, even if it meant unleashing the monster he had tried so hard to bury. The days that followed were a tightrope of tension. Magnus patrolled the woods, finding fresh tracks every morning. They were being watched. He helped Henderson fortify the homestead, knowing it was probably useless. His mind was always on Esther. He saw the worry in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. The threat had worn away at her composure, revealing a fragility that made him want to build a wall around her with his own body. You're watching me, she said one morning. They were alone in the kitchen before the sun came up. I'm watching for threats, he corrected, though they both knew it was more than that. The Utes could strike at any moment. Is that the only reason? She asked, her eyes searching his face, looking for the truth he kept so carefully hidden. He couldn't answer. He couldn't tell her that watching over her had become as necessary as breathing. The Henderson boys are fascinated by you, she said, changing the subject. They see past the giant everyone else is so afraid of. Children don't know enough to be afraid, he grumbled. Or maybe, she said softly, they're wise enough to see the good man underneath. Her words hit him like a physical blow. She saw him. She truly saw him. Before he could respond, the house stirred to life, and the moment was lost. That afternoon, a patrol from Pine Ridge rode in, led by Tom Morrison. Any sign? Morrison asked. They're watching, Magnus said, learning our routines. They're looking for a weakness. When will they strike? Henderson asked, his voice trembling. Soon, Magnus said with grim certainty. They won't wait much longer. Morrison urged Henderson to bring his family into town. Property can be rebuilt, Tom, he argued. Lives can't. But Henderson refused to budge. Magnus watched Esther in the kitchen, her hands busy, her face a mask of worry. She was staying. Her loyalty was going to get her killed. That evening, as they prepared dinner, he tried again. The church would be safer, he said. She stopped stirring the pot. If this was your home, Magnus, your family, would you leave? He thought about it. He understood Henderson's pride, but it was a fool's pride. I would do whatever it took to keep the people I cared about safe, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't hide. Everything else is just things. They don't matter if the people you love are dead. The words hung in the air between them. He had said too much. He had revealed the truth he had tried so hard to conceal. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a new understanding. Magnus, she began, but they were interrupted. The moment was gone, but the truth of it lingered. That night as he stood watch, he heard them. Horses, moving through the woods with practiced stealth. 6 of them, the Ute war party. He moved silently through the barn, checking his weapons. The time for waiting was over. The violence he had run from for 15 years had finally found him. His father's knife felt cold against his hip. The riders passed by without attacking. A warning, a promise. They would be back. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in blood red and gold, Magnus made a decision. He would not run anymore. He would fight. He would protect her, no matter the cost. He had fled to the mountains to escape the man he was afraid of becoming. But now for her, he would become that man again, whatever it took. The attack came with the dawn, but it wasn't what he expected. A single rider approached the homestead, his hands raised. Not a Ute warrior. A white man dressed in buckskins, his face hard and weathered. Hello, the house, the man called out. I'm looking for a man called Magnus Thorne. Ice flooded Magnus's veins. No one knew that name. No one. The stranger pulled a piece of paper from his saddlebag, a wanted poster. Even from a distance, Magnus could see the crude drawing of his own face. I know you're in there, Magnus, the man shouted. Or should I say, Magnus Mjolnir, wanted for 3 counts of murder in the Wyoming Territory, $1,000, dead or alive. The Hendersons stumbled out of the house, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. Magnus stepped out of the barn, his rifle held loose at his side. What is this? Henderson demanded. The bounty hunter smiled, a cold, ugly thing. Name's Jake Cartwright. Been tracking this man for 3 years. Magnus? Esther's voice was a broken whisper from the doorway. She was waiting for him to deny it. He couldn't. 20 years ago, Magnus said, his voice a low rumble. In Cheyenne. I killed 3 men. They were hurting a girl. I stopped them. The confession hung in the morning air. He saw Henderson tighten his grip on his shotgun. He saw Esther's face, not afraid but shattered, as if the man she thought she knew had just vanished before her eyes. Self-defense, was it? Cartwright laughed. That's not what the witnesses said. They said you went berserk, broke one man's neck with your bare hands, crushed another's skull against the bar, said it was like watching a wild animal. The darkness inside him stirred. He remembered that night, the red rage, the loss of control. They were going to rape a child, he said through gritted teeth. Maybe, Cartwright sneered, but the law says you kept hitting the last one long after he was down. That's what makes it murder. It was true, he had lost himself in the violence. He had become the monster he always feared he was. Why now? Magnus asked. After 20 years. The bounty's gone up, Cartwright said, his eyes gleaming. One of those men you killed had a son, a rich son. He's offering $5,000 now, and he's not picky about whether you're breathing when I deliver you. $5,000, a king's ransom. I'll go with you, Magnus said. Leave these people out of it. Magnus, no, Esther cried, stepping forward. But it was too late. Cartwright wasn't alone. As he spoke, 3 more armed men stepped out of the woods, surrounding the homestead. The Ute raids, Henderson whispered, the awful truth dawning on him. That was you. Had to keep the locals spooked, Cartwright confirmed with a grin. Can't have anyone interfering. They had played the whole town, used their fear as a weapon, all to trap him. You're making a mistake, Magnus said, the rage building in his voice. As long as you cooperate, these people are fine, Cartwright said, his hand resting on his pistol. Though I admit the pretty seamstress complicates things. Can't exactly leave a witness, can we? The threat against Esther was a lit match in a room full of gunpowder. Touch her, Magnus snarled, and I will kill every last one of you. Cartwright just laughed. There he is, the man-killer. It's in your blood, Magnus. You can't run from what you are. He saw Esther's face. She was looking at him, really looking at him, for the first time. Not as a gentle giant, but as a killer. Magnus, she said softly, whatever you did 20 years ago, that doesn't define who you are now. But he wasn't so sure. As Cartwright and his men closed in, he could feel the monster inside him clawing to get out. Maybe Cartwright was right. Maybe this was who he was meant to be all along. He looked at Esther's face one last time, trying to memorize it before the killing started. He wondered if she would even recognize him when it was all over. The standoff was a wire-pulled taut, ready to snap at any second. Magnus stood his ground, a mountain of fury, his mind racing. He had to get Esther and the Hendersons out of the line of fire. We can do this easy or we can do this hard, Cartwright said, lighting a cigarette like he didn't have a care in the world. The hard way involves a lot of digging. Magnus knew he wasn't bluffing. These men were killers. I need to get my things, Magnus said, his voice level. From my cabin. Cartwright's eyes narrowed. What kind of things? Keepsakes, from my mother. It was a partial truth. The cabin also held weapons, traps, and advantage. Nice try, Cartwright smirked. We'll send a couple of my boys with you. Fine, Magnus said, but the woman comes with me. Cartwright looked surprised. What? She left some things at my cabin during the storm, Magnus lied. She'll want to get them. He had to get her away from here, away from the children. If a gunfight started, they would be the first to die. Why should I care what she wants? Cartwright asked. Because she's your leverage, Magnus said, playing his only card. It was a terrible risk, admitting how much she meant to him. You harm her, and I stop cooperating. You can kill me, but you'll never take me alive. You won't get your money. A slow, cruel smile spread across Cartwright's face. He understood. Well now, the mountain man has a weakness. All right, Magnus, you can take your lady friend, but the Hendersons stay here with me. Any tricks, and they pay the price. He had no choice. Miss Fletcher, he called out, we're going to my cabin. She came out of the house, her face pale but her eyes steady. She had heard, she understood, and she trusted him. The journey up the mountain was silent and heavy with dread. 2 of Cartwright's men followed behind them, their rifles ready. This was it. The final confrontation was coming. Magnus, Esther said as they neared the cabin, whatever happens. Don't, he interrupted. Not yet. No, she insisted. I need you to know. What you did 20 years ago, it doesn't change the man you are. The man who saved me. The man who has protected these people. That is the real you. Her words were a balm on a wound he'd carried for 2 decades. In her eyes, he wasn't a monster. He was a good man. Esther, he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. The cabin came into view, his sanctuary. Now it was going to be a battleground. Hidden inside were weapons, escape routes, and one other thing, a hand-carved cradle. He had worked on it all winter, during the long, lonely nights. He told himself it was just a project to keep his hands busy, but in his heart, he had been carving a future he never thought he could have. A future with a wife, a family, a child of his own. A future that was about to be burned to the ground. Nice work, one of the bounty hunters said, running a hand over the smooth wood of the cradle. Shame to waste it on a killer. The casual cruelty of the remark made Magnus's hands clench into fists. That cradle wasn't just wood, it was a dream. As the night fell, he made his final preparations. He checked his hidden weapons. He planned his every move. He caught Esther's eye, and a silent understanding passed between them. They were in this together. He looked at the cradle, a symbol of a life he might never have, and he found a strange strength. He had carved it with hope. He would fight with that same hope. The darkness outside was absolute. The silence was broken only by the wind. The final battle was about to begin, and Magnus Mjolnir was about to find out if the love of a good woman was enough to conquer the sins of his past. The first scream ripped through the midnight air, but it wasn't a scream of battle. It was a scream of agony. Magnus spun around. Esther was doubled over, her hands clutching her stomach, her face a mask of pain. A stomach that was swollen, round, a detail he had somehow missed under her loose wool dresses. "The baby," she gasped, her eyes wide with fear and shame. "Magnus, I'm so sorry. I should have told you." His mind reeled. The morning sickness he thought was from the storm. The way she'd been so careful. It all crashed down on him at once. "How long?" he demanded. "6 months," she cried out as another wave of pain hit her. Since that night in the cabin. That night. The night they had found comfort in each other's arms. He had thought it was a moment of weakness. It had been the beginning of a new life. His child. She was having his child. Right here. Right now. "Jesus Christ," the bounty hunter in the cabin with them swore. "What do we do now?" "Keep her quiet," he hissed, raising his rifle. "We don't need her screaming and bringing the whole damn county down on us." The red rage Magnus had been fighting for 20 years exploded. He moved faster than a man his size should be able to move. His hand closed around the bounty hunter's throat, lifting him off the floor. The rifle clattered to the ground. "You will not touch her," Magnus snarled, his voice a low, deadly growl. "You will not even look at her." The man's face turned purple. The darkness was taking over. The killer was back. "Magnus, don't!" Esther screamed. "The baby! I need you!" Her voice cut through the rage. He looked at the dying man in his hands, then at her, and he made a choice. He dropped the bounty hunter, who collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. He knelt beside Esther. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice suddenly gentle. "Clean cloth," she panted. "Hot water." He moved with a new purpose. Outside, he could hear Cartwright yelling, his men confused. They had planned for a fight. They had not planned for a birth. This was a gift, a strange, terrible gift. They wouldn't risk a gunfight now, not with a woman in labor. It would be too loud, too risky. "How long until dawn?" Esther asked, her face beaded with sweat. 6 hours, he said. "Babies come when they're ready," she said with a weak smile. "And this one seems to be in a hurry." The next few hours were a strange dream. Part of him was the mountain man, listening to every sound outside, planning for the violence he knew was coming. The other part of him was a father. He held Esther's hand, wiped her brow, and marveled at her strength, a courage that put any warrior to shame. The bounty hunter, Peters, stayed huddled in the corner, too terrified to move. As the sun began to rise, Esther's quiet endurance broke. "It's time, here!" she cried. Outside, more horses were arriving. Cartwright's patience had run out. The final attack was coming. But Magnus's world had shrunk to this one small room. Guided by instinct and a few half-remembered words from his mother, he delivered his own child into the world. A son. The baby arrived with the first rays of sunlight, small and perfect and terrifyingly silent. Then Esther touched his tiny chest, and he let out a cry that filled the cabin with the sound of pure, unadulterated life. "We have a son," Magnus whispered, his hands that had taken lives, now trembling as they held a new one. The moment of peace was shattered. "Time's up, Magnus!" Cartwright's voice boomed from outside. "Come out now, or we're coming in." He looked at his son, then at Esther. The darkness was still there, but it was balanced now by a fierce, protective love he had never known. He wrapped the baby in a soft cloth and placed him gently in the cradle he had built for a dream that was now real. "Stay with him," he told Esther. "Protect our son." He walked to the door. He was no longer just a man running from his past. He was a father protecting his future. He stepped out into the dawn, his hands empty. Cartwright and his men were waiting, their guns trained on him. "Let them go," Magnus said. "The woman and the baby. They have nothing to do with this." "Can't do that," Cartwright sneered. "Too many witnesses." "You made a mistake," Magnus said, a cold calm settling over him. "You let me find something to fight for, something more important than my own life." And then he attacked. He moved like a force of nature, an avalanche of righteous fury. He didn't fight with the wild rage of his past, but with the focused, deadly precision of a father protecting his family. He broke bones, he disabled, he dismantled Cartwright's crew with brutal efficiency. "The cabin!" Cartwright screamed in a panic. "Burn them out!" The threat to his family snapped the last of his control. He caught Cartwright's rifle, bending the barrel in his massive hand. He lifted the bounty hunter off the ground by his throat. The darkness surged, begging him to finish it, to crush the life out of this man. And then from inside the cabin, he heard his son cry. A small, helpless sound, a sound that cut through the rage like a bolt of lightning. His son deserved a father, not a murderer. With a roar, he hurled Cartwright against a tree, knocking him unconscious. The remaining men stared in terror. They dropped their weapons and fled into the woods. He was alone, victorious. He had faced the monster inside himself and won. He walked back into the cabin. Esther was sitting up, their son cradled in her arms. "Is it over?" she whispered. "It's over," he said, sitting beside her. He was shaking. "You didn't kill him." "No," he said, looking at his son. "Our son deserves better." They sat in silence, a family forged in fire and blood. "What should we name him?" Esther asked. He thought of the life he'd left behind, and the new one he was just beginning. "James," he said. "A good man deserves to be remembered." Tears streamed down her face. "James Thorne," she whispered. "It's perfect." Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the shadows. A new day was beginning, a new life. He reached out and touched his son's face. This child would know love, not fear. He would have a father who built things, instead of one who broke them. 6 months later, a photographer from Denver captured their first family portrait. Magnus, the giant mountain man, looking almost gentle in a stiff suit. Esther, beautiful and radiant, holding their son. James Thorne, a big, healthy baby with his mother's steady brown eyes, gazing solemnly at the camera. The town of Pine Ridge had slowly, cautiously accepted them. The story of what happened that night on the mountain had spread, turning the feared giant into a local legend. The protector. The Hendersons became their closest friends. Magnus found he had a knack for settling disputes, his quiet strength and fair-mindedness earning him the respect of the community. The irony was not lost on him. The very nature he had run from was now the foundation of his new life. Their cabin grew, 2 new rooms added to hold their expanding family. Esther was pregnant again. The house was no longer silent and empty. It was filled with laughter, with love, with life. One evening as they sat by the fire, James sleeping in the cradle that had started it all, Esther asked him, "Do you ever regret it, giving up the solitude?" He looked around the warm, cluttered room. "I was never looking for solitude, he said. I was looking for safety, a way to keep people safe from me." He looked at her, his heart full. "But you taught me something. Love doesn't make us weak. It makes us who we were always meant to be." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And who were you meant to be, Magnus Thorne?" He looked at his sleeping son, at the woman who had seen the man behind the monster. "A husband," he said. "A father." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the mountains in white. But inside the cabin, it was warm. A new life, a new beginning. A love that had grown in the darkest of places. Magnus Thorne, the mountain man, the killer, the giant, was finally home. If this story touched your heart, and you want to see more tales of love against the odds, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what I have for you tomorrow is truly something special.